Good evening and welcome to Open End. My name is David Susskind. Tonight a guest who truly needs no introduction from me. He is one of America's great entertainers. He is also a director of the first rank. He has been a triumph in radio, in television, in nightclubs, in motion pictures. His record is really quite extraordinary. His name is Jerry Lewis. In just a moment, we'll begin our program. Jerry, I want to thank you very much for taking the time out to be here tonight.
Thank you, David.
Everyone in America has seen you many years be very funny, talented in many directions. Our mission here tonight, at least mine, is to try to find out what makes you tick, you know. And the man is not full-blown on the scene. He comes from a lot of background. He was born somewhere. He had parents. He lived a certain way.
In most cases.
Yes. Now, in your case, you are, I think, one of those children almost literally born in a trunk to a vaudeville father and mother. Isn't that true?
That's right. Yeah. I suspect the expression "born in the trunk" was invented for me. Then I found out there were other people that were born that way.
Your mother and dad were vaudeville performers, weren't they?
Yes, they appeared in vaudeville. My mother and dad worked as a team. Then my mother played for my dad. She's a very, very accomplished pianist. And then my dad worked alone in burlesque, in the Borscht Belt. Did just about everything you could do theatrically.
Now, a father and mother who traveled around playing engagements in vaudeville, the Borscht Belt, nightclubs, and so forth. What sort of life was that for you as a youngster?
Well, I guess at the time, it was quite exciting, and it was marvelous in that school wasn't a must in the literal sense of the word. I had to travel with them, and it was an exciting thing. As I look back now and reflect on it, it's not something that I look upon as great happiness. I know much better now, as opposed to when I was 7, 8, 9 years old. I was in a number of schools. I must have had 15 or 16 transfers from one school to the next, so much so that it resulted in my being left back in school, which is a very, very ugly...
What grade?
Well, I can't really recall that exactly. I know I was about 9 years old. It would have had to have been the 3rd or 4th grade, I guess. It left a very, very bleak, dark scar in that it wasn't based on my inability to learn. It was based on my traveling so much that I wasn't really up to snuff. I've often wondered if that wasn't a qualification or if I wasn't defending the fact that I was left back, you know. But you just couldn't stay up with what was being taught. That's rough with traveling.
How are you left back when that happens? Is it a slip of paper? What happens to you?
No, that's possibly the saddest, most medieval. Is that the word? Yeah. It's just from the Dark Ages as far as I'm concerned. I can look back at it looking in the first person, yet at the same time I can recall the child. I have such an affinity for children, such a feeling for little people, that I can refer to myself and think of him. And I guess some of us need that. You refer to yourself in your mind or think of yourself as the child, and you can feel sorry for him, which I think is real. I don't know, there must be some psychological reason for being capable of doing that, but I remember seeing, I can see it now, that some 38 children all stood up and went from, let's say it was the 4th grade, to the next classroom, which would be their next grade, the 5th. The one that was left back was left in his seat to an empty room.
That was you?
That was me. Then the incoming class from down the hall would come into their now upgraded room and stand along the blackboard for seat assignments. They would, of course, all, 38 of them, look at the one that was left back. And until the seat assignments were made, I believe I must have gone through a very rough winter, a quick fall, and a long spring in all of that 20 minutes.
Jerry, were your folks poor?
Well, that depends on how you mean poor. I wouldn't say it was poverty poor, but we certainly lacked a great deal in that my dad was floundering and trying desperately to be a success and wanted so much to attain what most performers want, and that's stardom. And he had some terrifyingly difficult times. My dad was a very, very handsome man, still is, and had fantastic comic ability, and was a marvelous singer and a marvelous straight man, and he ran the gamut. But he was not, by any means, a good businessman. And consequently, he never really held on to anything for any degree of time, and he was never able to really establish himself as any one thing. He would be a performer in burlesque as a straight man singer. He would be a performer in the mountains as a host, MC. He would play comedy and stage and produce and write and direct shows and so on. And there was never any way that someone could say, Danny Lewis is this and we will play him here, etc. Consequently, he'd play burlesque, and at the rate of $50 a week, I recall, Dad would have to pay his laundry and hotel on the road. Mom and I would be home at the apartment, small apartment in Irvington, New Jersey. And he would send, I guess it was $30 or $35 of his $50 home for our sustenance and living and so on. And he would have to live on a minimal amount of money. And we just had to do. I remember my mother bought me a suit at Hearn's with 2 pairs of pants. And with the luck all comics have, I tore a hole in a jacket. But it was the type of tweed suit that I recall when it rained, the steam came out of it. That's pretty, you know, it's rough enough to have a suit that thick, that cheap, to have the steam come out when it rains. You know, that's really salt on the wound.
When they would travel, your mother and father, to play engagements, wherever they were, who did you live with? Who brought you up?
Anybody.
What do you mean, anybody?
Anybody in the family. I lived with my aunts, my grandmother primarily, or one of my mother's 3 sisters. I'd live in Albany with my Aunt Betty, or I'd live in Newark with my Aunt Rose, or go to Brooklyn with my Aunt Jean. Most of the time, and my happiest times, of course, were with my grandmother, who had the wisdom of Socrates and all of the apostles. A great lady. And she was a very, very big love in my life. When she had passed away, then I was pillar to post. I was a rent-a-kid-a-day club, you know. Who wants Jerry this week?
Well, without getting Freudian, Jerry, what's the effect of being a floating child, having no real home, a variety of supervisors, aunts, grandmothers, uncles?
What's the effect?
Were you unloved? Did you feel unwanted or something?
Well, I think that a child in the formative years, any child, I don't care what the conditions, if he's not given a substantial upbringing, what I mean by substantial is a normal upbringing, that's the word I should use. If he's not given to understand that it's morning, noon, and night in the confines of parental care, a child in the formative years doesn't understand Dad has to be on the road and Mom is working in town and you go to school. And a child doesn't know about that. I think the effect on a child, I think that the payment for any improper application to a child comes many, many years later. The dues comes due, or the rent is paid, as it were. But I don't look upon it as terrifying times, because when you say, what's the result? Well, the result sits before you. I don't really have a lot to be sorry about. I'm very grateful for that matter, because I do believe, were it not for some of these things that sound a little frightening, and in my best recollection they are a little sad, as it were, were I devoid of those things, I think that I would have turned out differently. I look to these things that carry some degree of pain and some reluctance to talk about. Those things that I feel that way about, I think, are the reasons that men become what they are, good, bad, or otherwise.
Your description of your early life seems to give credence to the idea that comedy and tragedy are just a hairline away from each other. From that kind of background, you became a funny man, a comic, a man who makes millions of people all over the world laugh all the time.
You have to be one of the millions of people.
Does it have a core of sadness and tragedy?
Yes, I believe so. I think that it's quite sad in the mere fact that you walk out in front of an audience. There is a sad connotation to the fact that you say, ladies and gentlemen, watch me, I'm going to show off. There's a sad element in just doing that. I don't know of it literally to be sad when I do it. I know of it to be a lovely, wonderful gift, and I get tremendous, tremendous pleasure out of giving, because I am literally taking much more than I give when I do give. I am much more fulfilled than any audience derives pleasure from what I do. My fulfillment is far greater than the pleasures they get. So it's a selfish, very selfish kind of a thing to do this, but to stand up before people who are most comfortable, mind you, an audience at the Sands in Vegas, for example, or at a theater here in New York, an audience is most satisfied to sit there, buy a ticket, and calmly relax. That's not enough for me. I won't sit with an audience and buy a ticket and calmly relax. I want to be the center of attention. Well, that's pretty sad having to do that, if you want to look at it from that point of view.
You want to be the center of attention off stage as well as on stage?
No. Off stage, I don't need that kind of center of attention anymore. I used to. I used to need it all the time. But I am the center of attention with my family now, and I find that that's just about all you need. I am the kingpin around the house, and that's marvelous. I'm kingpin just being dad. It has nothing to do with reputation or title.
How far did you go in school, Jerry?
Second year high school.
And you dropped out then?
Yeah, I feigned reasons for dropping out. Oh, it was imperative that I work to help my family. Wow, no, that wasn't the case. I wasn't thrilled with school. I now regret it, of course. I would have loved the additional 2 years in high school and the possibility of being the Bula Bula champ at some college with 2 stripes on the white sweater, and that the big game couldn't start on Saturday unless I crammed. I dreamed about that. I always pictured any college I would go to, I'd have a car with a rumble seat with a pretty blonde, and Betty Grable would walk by with Benny Baker on her arm. You know, I dreamed about college, wanted it very much. Then when I realized that there were some subjects in college that were a little more terrifying than algebra, I was thrilled to drop out at 16 in the second year. I wish I didn't.
Did you go right into show business?
Yes, I performed. Well, I was performing from the time I was 5 years old, on and off.
What did you do at 5?
I sang Brother Can You Spare a Dime for $5.
Where?
It was the President Hotel in Swan Lake in the Borscht Belt. As a matter of fact, the headliner at the time was Jan Murray. And my dad was on the bill with Jan, with Mom, and they presented their little 5-year-old boy to sing Brother Can You Spare a Dime. I was a very big hit. I never got the $5.
What happened?
I think my father beat me for it, I'm not sure.
When did the comedy lightning strike, Jerry? When did you say, I'm for comedy?
Oh, I guess when I remember watching my father look in the glass to see what I looked like. I think I saw a reflection of myself laying in that blue blanket, and I decided I better get a laugh.
Well...
Because he was laughing, so I wanted to justify it.
What I can't understand is you grew up with a father and mother constantly on the road. You were left with a variety of relatives. School was tough. You had 16 different transfers. You were left back. Wouldn't all that kind of create a hostility toward show business? Not for me. If this is the kind of life it meant for me, give me something else. How come you gravitated toward show business?
I really don't know, Dave. I don't think that I was ever aware that there could be a hostility. I felt no hostility towards show business because I never believed that show business was the villain of the play. It really wasn't, because if my dad were working in any other field of endeavor, I think that if it wasn't the case of being shipped pillar to post and so on, it would have been something else. And I have a very, very strong philosophy in that I think from all bad comes good, and that's of late, I should say. That philosophy is just of late. But as I look back, from all bad, I have found good. I have never ever had just bad. And as I reflect on all of the years that I can call upon, when my memory serves me, there's always good in all of the bad.
Jerry, I know you for so many years, and it is also a legend about you that you're one of the great spenders of show business. You, in very generous terms, you help friends, you pay hospital bills, you do that sort of thing for many people.
Where do you get that information, David?
I know it to be true, but also I know, and it's no secret, that you... How many suits do you own?
I couldn't give you a fair count. I can give you an estimate.
Give me an estimate.
By own, you mean hanging on a rack?
Hanging in the closets.
Oh, maybe between 350 and 400 suits.
I see. How many pairs of shoes? Could you make a guess?
I know there are 12 shelves in my closet, and on each shelf we can stack about 20 pair. I'd say a couple hundred pair.
A couple hundred pair. And a rough guess on the number of shirts you own.
Well, on this trip, I don't know. I would say
A few hundred.
a gross.
I see. Do you think that all that kind of almost compulsive buying of
It is compulsive buying.
worldly goods is some kind of compensation for the background you had as a child, where perhaps you were down to that suit that steam came out of when you wore it, with 2 pairs of pants?
I think more than likely. I think that the amateurs, the most amateur analyst would have to say that's literally the case. I think that a psychiatrist student in his first year would say, well, that's so academic, you know. I would have to assume that that's the reason. It is, when you say almost compulsive buying, I didn't mean to contradict you. It is compulsive.
You can't control yourself. You couldn't walk in a store and say, I'll have a suit, or give me a pair of shoes.
Oh, sure I could. I think that I like to say it's compulsive because I don't want to be any different. I get great pleasure out of doing it. I work very hard for what I earn. And as a compensating factor, I make sure that I buy enough for everybody.
What do you mean by that?
Well, I happen to have the only staff of any producer or director or performer. I think I have the only staff in the world where all of my people wear my size. And I have people that are all different weights, heights, ages, and so on, but they all wear my size. I have like 30 guys that wear my shoes. All the same size. One guy has a 9.5 foot. I wear a 10, but it fits perfect. He walks slowly.
Well, how many times do you wear a pair of shoes before you give it to your staff?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know. I think I send many more clothes to the Boys' Town of Italy and to the poor in Europe and the foster children's homes. I just get a kick out of ordering an abundance of things, knowing full well when I order them that they're going in many, many good places. Now, I think that an awful lot of that desire to give many of the things that I buy is a qualifier. Maybe that'll help me buy the few things that I'm going to enjoy with better peace of mind. I don't know.
Do you love things?
Do I love things?
Yes.
I love brass and wheels and electric and monorails and skin and lamps and air and grass. I love everything, especially things that move. If you ever had anything that turned, I would just love to hug it and watch it. I love things that turn.
Well, we have a message coming.
I'm going to watch that machine turn.
We'll be back in just a moment. Jerry, you bought one of the great mansions of Hollywood. You bought the L.B. Mayer mansion, and rumor has it that it